What if I told you that trauma isn't just something soldiers bring back from war or victims carry from violence, but something most of us are carrying quietly, invisibly, every day? What if I told you it can show up as perfectionism, people pleasing, procrastination, or even ambition? Today, we're not just talking about trauma, we're unpacking the invisible luggage we didn't even know we were dragging through life. And by the end of this episode, you might just start to understand why you feel the way you do and what healing really looks like. That and more on the Almost Awakened podcast.
Healing begins in the body, but awakening touches everything: relationships, purpose, identity, pleasure, and truth. Join Bill Reel and Teresa Hobbs as they explore the real work of becoming a healthier you. Welcome to Almost Awakened.
Welcome to the Almost Awakened podcast. I am one of your hosts, Bill Reel,
And I am Teresa Hobbs.
and grateful for the chance to sit down with you today. Last week, we talked about the nervous system and we discussed trauma and how our body responds to that trauma. Some of those responses are in the what's called dorsal or shutdown sort of reactions. Some of them, the ventral or ventral vagal, is sort of the standard healthy way that
Yes.
we show up and handle things that happen to us. What's the third one, where we want to fight and we want to yell and scream and push back against something?
Yeah, that's our sympathetic part of our nervous system, and that's our fight flight. And then we also have a combination, which is the freeze response, which is a combination of sympathetic and that dorsal shutdown response. And that's that place where we feel like we're just kind of stuck. We can't move, we can't do anything, but we have a lot of energy in our system.
Yeah. And today we want to talk about trauma itself. We defined it last week, but we should probably do that again for the audience. What would you like to say about what trauma is?
So, trauma is not what happened to you. A lot of people will often think it's the event itself, but it's actually what happens inside of you in response to a very challenging event when you don't have enough internal resources or you don't have a safe place to return to so that you can tell your system that the situation or event is over. It's essentially somebody who never really got the memo or the message that what happened is ended, and so that energy can kind of continue to cycle through their system over and over again. And then they can have moments where they get triggered when they experience something similar. It reminds them of a past issue, and their system goes into that same level of high activation or shutdown. So essentially, it's not the event, but it's the experience that happens inside. And yeah.
Why do you think, Teresa, why do you think it's important to focus on what's going on inside rather than the event?
Because I think a lot of people will try to define whether or not somebody, the way somebody responds to something is justified or not. So, and everybody has different capacity. We all grow up with different sort of wiring, different levels of parental care and attunement that wires our system to either have a lot of resilience to challenging situations, or for people who didn't get enough attunement in early childhood, it can wire their system to be more protective and to have less capacity to deal with challenges. And so, it's important to understand that everybody's going to experience things very differently. And what is traumatizing to one person may not be traumatizing to another. And that doesn't mean that it's not still a difficult experience.
You use that word attunement. Uh, what do you want to say about that? There's this idea that in our younger years, we have no clue how the world works. We come into this world and everything is training. Everything is the world showing up in front of us and us trying to figure out what everything means. And we don't have a clue. And all we have are, these parents who are often ill equipped. We've got maybe grandparents in the picture, but maybe sometimes they're ill equipped too. And there's a really big, dangerous sort of lack of safety in the world.
Yeah.
What does it mean? What does attunement mean to you?
So attunement is the way that a caregiver shows up in response. So An attuned parent is someone who can be able to recognize when their child is in distress, and they can communicate a cue of safety. They can, attunement comes through the sound of the voice. It comes through responding to needs at the right times, being able to accurately perceive what the child needs, and then being able to respond in a helpful manner. And it's being able to convey cues of safety to the developing child. And when they get enough of those moments of attunement, it helps them wire their nervous system so that they can return to states of safety, so that they know what safety is, so that they have the ability to self-regulate. Because our ability to self-regulate our nervous system and cope with challenging situations comes from the quality of co-regulation that we received as children. So it's really vital. And what's interesting too is a lot of parents will have, and you may relate to this being a parent. A lot of parents will have a lot of guilt over feeling like they didn't show up perfectly for their children. But statistically speaking, and I can't remember where this comes from, but they say that you only need about to be like attuned to your children about 30% of the time, which is kind of interesting. So you don't actually have to be a perfect parent, but you just need to be a good enough parent.
I look back at my own childhood. My mother was in foster care, and she was taken a long distance from her family. My mom was born in Ohio. Her foster parents took her away from her family, took her to California, and she spent a few years there. And that experience was horrific for her. My dad grew up in an abusive home. He had a father who was physically abusive with him, and neither of them got the care from their parents or foster parents that they needed or deserved. And I can see in the extended family, so my aunts and uncles on both sides, I can see a ton of dysfunction. Somehow my parents come together and my mom just put her foot down. She was like, I'm gonna raise a healthy family. And I don't know how she did it, and they've got their own dysfunction. My mom, of course, has since passed away, but I was raised in a home where I felt loved. I felt safe. I felt like my needs were taken care of. I wasn't really scared of the world outside. And I don't know how they pulled it off. They were young, 17, 18 years old. And it could have gone a lot of different ways, because I look at, again, some of my aunts and uncles, and I see tons of dysfunction in places. And I grew up with some degree of a sense of safety. And so when you point to attunement, like, there's certainly things that have happened to me, and maybe we'll even get into some of those today. But it really makes a world of difference for a kid in a home situation where things are happening that are disruptive, for them to sense that even as life happens and challenges come up, that I'm safe here to some degree. And then we think about families where someone loses a parent, uh, something tragic happens where a parent is physically or sexually abusive, and then we can just get like, that kid did not have a sense of safety, so they figured out other ways to deal with these horrific things that happened to them. And what you're pointing to is this idea of attunement, which is being able to sort of be aware, know that what's kind of happening or not happening, sense the safety, be able to sort of deal with what's going on. And you say a parent doesn't have to be the successful 30%,
Mhm.
but a lot of us end up not getting that. Any thoughts
Yeah.
on what it means when we don't get that?
Yeah, and another aspect to tie into that is, so you only need to be, 30% attuned apparently. But what's really, really important is that when you are misattuned, or when you have overly reacted to your kid, or gotten angry or whatever, that you offer a repair process. So that's what actually makes the difference. If you're a child in a situation and your parent is blowing up all the time, and then they're not coming back to you to let you know, like, "I'm so sorry, I've been really stressed out. This isn't about you." then what happens is that child starts to internalize all of that chaos and activation internally, and they start to make sense of it, that it's something about them, and it doesn't give them a sense of safety. Um, so you don't have to be a perfect parent, but I think it's really important that people learn how to offer that repair process. I think that's what makes the difference, giving children context and helping them understand. Um, yeah, so attunement is really important in developing the ability to have that capacity for ventral, to have that capacity for safety and social engagement, so that if, when challenging things happen, we have a place to return to and we can shut off that stress activation. And when we didn't get enough of that, we don't have that capability. We don't have that ability to self-regulate. And so challenging things can come up, and we can end up getting stuck in survival physiology, survival states that eventually turn into different adaptations, and like, if we're not wired for connection through that attunement, we become wired for protection.
It is, again, I know trauma isn't the event, it's how we processed it. But the event does matter. I mean, some events are
Yeah.
horrific, and you can almost guarantee that everyone within the shockwave of that event is going to be traumatized in some way. The people at ground zero on 9/11,
Yeah.
how could you not, right? And but it's not just the event, it's the way we process it. So, different people have different capacities. Some of us are very sensitive to our environment. Some of us are very attuned to what others are feeling in the room. So, empathy. Uh, some folks are less that way. And we mentioned last week not to judge people based on the event, but to take people's word for it based on what they're carrying and how they express themselves around that.
Yeah.
But it's not even just those, it's the way in which the event happened, your ability to process it, maybe your level of sensitivity to it, but then it's also how people showed up in response to the event
Yeah.
you just named.
Yes. Is it okay if I share a story about that? Just to give a kind
Please.
of illustration of that. So this is a personal story, but when I was really young, I had an experience happen that was very shocking and overwhelming to me. And I brought it to my parents because that was, who I trusted at the time. And I don't think my parents were quite prepared for it. And this is no fault on them, but they didn't quite know how to respond, and so they sort of didn't respond at all. And that left me making meaning of this experience that I had in a very negative way. And I I internalized this idea that I shouldn't speak of it again. So therefore, I had to hold this trauma by myself from that point forward, and it haunted me through my entire childhood. I had panic attacks in response to it, and I never felt like it was safe to share it, because if my parents had responded to me in that sort of I wouldn't even say it was a negative way. It was almost like a deer in the headlights kind of way. And because of that response, because there wasn't enough safety or context or support provided afterwards, I carried it internally for a really long time. And had there been, I look back on it now and I think like, oh, how would I, how would I have needed my parents to have responded at the time? And, if they had been able to just be open and normalize what happened and help me work through it, I don't think I would have carried that as trauma. That's why it became a trauma in the first place. So, like, that aspect is really important. And I wanna kinda talk a little bit about how trauma gets stored in the body. Like, this event we talk about, it's not the event, but it's what happens to us internally in response to the event. And so, going back to that example of my experience, I I internalized everything, and then I developed these different levels of protection to sort of cope and deal with it. So, I became hypervigilant. Um, I had, in response to this, I developed a kind of like OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, where was constantly trying to control my environment in all these small ways because I felt so deeply out of control. And I didn't have resources to help me process that activation that was still, spinning in my system. And it was actually just getting bigger and bigger and bigger because of all the meaning I kept making of it. And so, eventually that energy, it stays with you for such a long time that it can impact your nervous system. It can impact your physical body in different ways because it's stored in the body. It's not just an experience that happens to you psychologically.
Do you think everybody is carrying around, I don't wanna say significant, but I also don't I think we all everyone gets trauma. I always say the thing that, the thing I always go to in this talking point is to say that mothers giving birth and babies being born are traumatized. You can't bring life into this world or be the life that comes into this world without being traumatized. So
Mhm.
we're all traumatized. Do you think we're all carrying around, I'll just say it, a significant amount of trauma?
I think so, and this is just my personal opinion, and it's something I wanna do another podcast on about, sort of our culture and how we raise children in this culture, and because I don't think most of us get enough healthy attunement to have a nervous system that is wired for resilience, that's wired for connection and thriving. I think most of us have come from a long generational line of generational trauma of of not having what we need in order to function at our highest, in order to be resilient to trauma. And so, I do think a lot of people carry around that, and I also think that we live in a world where this is another aspect about trauma. So trauma is not always just a one-time event, right? Sometimes you can be traumatized from chronic, perpetual, smaller events. And I think people can, going through a lot of chronic stress, just the constant barrage of daily stress that we go through and living in this fast-paced world that we live in, our systems aren't really adapted to that. Our nervous systems aren't adapted to that. Like, all of this technology has come about so quickly that we haven't really had time to, evolve. Our nervous system and our brain hasn't had time to sort of catch up to all that, and so I think we're in a time in life where we're sort of mismatched, and so we sort of accumulate all of this continual, constant, chronic stress, which eventually depletes our capacity. And then, that sets us up for essentially becoming traumatized by all kinds of stuff in life. Um, I'm trying to think of different examples that seem mild, but that can actually, be traumatizing for different people. Can you
We
think
were
of
just
anything that seemed
Yeah,
yeah.
we were just having a conversation last night about babies. The way I raised my kids,
Mm,
I got my oldest kid is Will, and he gets to be, when they're infants, we're taught as soon as they cry, go help them, go change the
mhm,
diaper, feed the bottle, all the things. But I got informed by my parents and uh, in my even the extended family, aunts and uncles and others would put their 2 cents in, and there was this prevalent messaging, which was when they get to be a year old, let them cry themselves to sleep. And
mhm.
so we did that. We did that with all, of the 4 kids that we had had. And that's that's not the healthy way to look at it. You and I were talking about this last night, and the what's the gentleman's name? Gabor Maste?
Doc Gabor Mate, yeah, mhm,
Gabor Mate. And we were having a conversation listening to a podcast of his that's not really healthy for a kid. The kid is crying, and in a tribal society would be tended to. They would sleep near their family because
yep,
our housing structure was a tent or a wigwam or a one-room cabin or the inside of a cave. We would have been so close to our family that folks would have tended to us whenever we were hurt or upset. And
yeah,
now we give children the messaging that's like, deal with it and suck it up, and nobody's going to come help you. And you might cry yourself for hours, self soothing.
Mhm.
Any thoughts there?
Yeah. Yes. So, again, this points to why I feel like our social systems, our cultures aren't designed well for healthy child development and haven't been for a very, very long time. We've become very disconnected from what's required to really be in alignment with uh, our fundamental wiring. And I think that the cry it out method, essentially what happens there is the child will cry, and because they're not having the caregiver come to offer that co-regulation, because by the way, when a child is born, they have no ability to self-regulate. It's not they don't have it, it's not possible. So if they're not able to get that co-regulation, which is essentially when a parent comes and offers support and love to a child who's having activation or feeling something, the parent is lending that child their ventral system. They're lending that child their sense of safety, and eventually the child learns to build that on their own, and then they can have the ability to self-regulate. And so, when you let a child cry it out like that, the only way that it can bring down that activation or self-soothe, as they call it, is to utilize their dorsal vagal response, and that's that shutdown. So, parents will be like, "Oh, hey, they went to sleep, everything's fine." But what really happened was that child just shut down. They completely they utilized the dorsal brake to slow themselves down, and that can become habitual later on. So then when later in life when a child experiences activation, or even as an adult when they experience high activation, rather than being able to know like, "Oh, I can reach for the ventral state because I have access to my ventral vagal system has been wired really well, so I know that I can reach for safety." They will pull that emergency brake of the dorsal system, and they will go into that shutdown or that foggy thinking, or yeah, it's not healthy, but how did any of us know any better? Like, that's just what we were told, and now that we're learning a little bit more about the nervous system and healthy child development, we have, new information, but still most parents kind of you do what your parents did, right? That's how you knew how to raise children.
Yeah, I was meeting with a therapist a year and a half ago or so, maybe a year ago, and he would sit down with me, and I would say, I don't really have any traumas. I don't have any.
Yeah.
Uh, and he said, well, let's spend some time with that. And I came in one day, and I was feeling something. I was uh, upset about something or whatnot. And he did this practice where he helped me sort of go into my body, sort of a body scan. Where am I feeling that? Okay, let's sit with that, and the way he drew the way he drew the information out by the questions he asked was, he got me to focus on what I was feeling and to just sit still and try to notice what that goes back to,
Mm,
where it was in my life that went to. And it ended up going to a moment in first grade where a teacher was highly abusive of a situation with me. And when I connected, when my brain, because I'd been sort of, I haven't mentioned that story. I don't utilize it in telling my narrative. It's not part of the things I say when I get into a conversation about who I am and what I've experienced that's made me me. But having the conversation with him connected those dots, and I ended up, I lost it. I cried for a while. There was something that happened to me that was traumatic, and um, if it had been handled the right way, I went home, I told my parents, they called the school, the teacher calls back, they confront her, and she denies it happened, and this is the '80s, so, uh, when crap happens to you in the '80s, you just got on your bike and you rode home. You
yeah.
didn't, it wasn't any, nobody did anything about it. And had it been handled right, I just think I would have moved on from it. It wouldn't have been nothing. But because it wasn't handled right, my 7, 8, 9-year-old self, I'm in first grade, so I'm 9. My 9-year-old self couldn't make sense of the world I thought was fair and balanced, and there were good people all around. not everyone's perfect, but no one's deceptive, no one's manipulative.
Mm.
I don't know that yet.
Yeah.
And I have this experience where this teacher shows up in such a way that I have to go like, "Oh, the adult in the room avoided accountability, so I had to feel shame in this moment."
Mhm.
And then when questioned about it later, the adult in the room doesn't handle that appropriately, and it really isn't the thing that happened. It really is the process that we have to confront when the traumatizing thing is
Yeah.
occurring or has passed, and we're trying to see if the world will care for us in a way that's healthy and responsible, and it often doesn't.
Yeah. And I don't know if you feel comfortable sharing this, but I'm curious what protections or what coping mechanisms sort of came on board to help you navigate and deal with the internalized shame you had.
The most predominant thing that goes on inside of me that has me showing up in irresponsible, unhealthy ways is shame. And it
Mhm.
goes back to that moment. I'm sure there's other moments too.
Yeah.
But if I go, where's the moment where I learned that if I'm not careful, things will happen and people will laugh at me. I will be embarrassed. I'll have, I'll feel shame is that moment. And from that point forward, I can pick out so many times in my adult life where something's happening in the room and it might not even be me, but if I perceive that I'm about to do something what would be perceived silly or uh, um, embarrassing, I will do everything I can to get out of that situation, and I will look awkward trying to get out of that
Mhm.
situation.
Yeah.
And it's even to the point where if someone I care about, who I've sort of connected my identity to, at the time it would have been an ex-spouse or one of my children, if they showed up in a way that I'm like, "Oh, that's gonna
Yeah.
embarrass us or me," I would try to quickly manipulate the situation so to distance what they're doing or about to do from the judgment in the room that I would automatically feel is pointed towards me,
Yeah.
even though it's not me. I'm not the one doing it.
Yeah.
I couldn't just let things be. So I have kids, some of my children that really I bumped into them really hard in this. And to this day, our relationship isn't great because they perceive me as always being judgmental of them and always trying to make them be or do
Mhm.
because I couldn't have them just be themselves because there were so many moments that I felt like it was a reflection of me and I was going to feel shame in those moments.
Yeah. And when you were in first grade and you had that experience and you had an experience of shame, it was an amplified experience of shame. Like whatever got triggered in you activated shame and it went up, 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 but it never got to discharge. It never got to come down. There wasn't safety on the other side of that to sort of help that dissipate. And so it's almost like that emotion can stay cycling, in your system. And anytime a hint of it comes up again, you will do anything you can to avoid it because it's so painful. Because again, it wasn't normalized, it wasn't held in the way that it needed to be, and you made a certain meaning about it. And what our systems do when they're trying to protect us is they will do anything they can to avoid having that thing happen again. That's part of our survival mechanism, right? It's working the way it was intended to. Because if something bad happens or something dangerous happens, um, our brain is going to be on high alert to make sure that we don't experience that again. And this can be true of real physical danger, but it can also be true of emotional experiences. And so, that's why trauma isn't just about, shock trauma, like something physically dangerous happened to you. It can also be a situation where you were humiliated or felt public shame or had a rupture with a caregiver, went through betrayal, where somebody you found out somebody lied to you in some way, like, all of that can set us up for feeling, traumatized.
Yeah. In in secular Buddhism circles, we have this phrase shadow work, and often our deepest, darkest shadows are things that were developed in our childhood. in internal family systems, we would talk about the exile, the kid in us who got deeply hurt and went into exile, and now the protectors and the managers come out to sort of shield that exile from having to feel or deal with what happened when we were kids. Um, Trying to think where.
Well, I think that's really interesting because again, that concept of like protectors, like the exiles are the ones. So the exile would be the shame, the one who felt the shame for you, right? And the protectors are the ones who enact certain behaviors to prevent that from ever happening, to prevent that level of shame from ever being activated again. And they can do some really crazy stuff. These are coping mechanisms. These are protective mechanisms. And some of them that we have written down here are, dissociation, people pleasing, rage, hyper independence. And we will we will enact these protections until they no longer serve us, right? People, if they have enough rage attacks or whatever, um, eventually somebody's gonna have something to say about that, and they're gonna get called out for it. Like that's not an appropriate behavior. It's something that they've developed to try to protect themselves, but it's not actually healthy. And so eventually these self protections do not work in our favor anymore. And that's eventually when we recognize that we have to sort of look deeper and try to find a different way to work with the held trauma or the held activation that we still hold in our system.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to point at was almost always these things go back to our childhood. And in reference to shadow work, it's called shadow because we don't see it. It's sort of hidden from us. Where everyone else in the room might notice it at times, but we're sort of carrying out a self-deception. And in IFS, it's worded in a different way, but it's the same idea, which is the exile is gone. Like they're somewhere else. They're being protected at a distance from the rest of the public and sometimes even our own internal self. And we don't really have the capacity to get in there and work with that until we notice it.
Mm.
We have to sort of perceive that it's there. And you pointed out that we run into something. We run into some moment where the bullshit stops.
Yeah.
We've done something where we go, I don't want to do it this way anymore. I need help. I need some, I've been working at this for 30 years to figure this thing out and I'm not able to. And I just want to note to the audience, often these things take a therapist or a coach or help because it really takes someone else shining a light on you to sort of pick it out. You mentioned earlier, trauma isn't just the giant event that happens to us. It can be the thing that occurs every Tuesday at 3.
Mm.
It can be the thing that's constantly happening to us. And I think we should spend a moment talking about big T and little t traumas. We all recognize, again, if somebody's at the ground level of 9/11 when it happens, they're going to have trauma. There's no getting around it.
Yeah.
But also being picked on at the lunch table every day at
Mhm.
school, uh, having somebody declare your worth as less than than it should be perceived as, can do it. What do you want to say about big T, little t traumas? Um, because I think some people, we mentioned this maybe in the beginning. Some people think I was in a car accident when I was 11 and I lost my mom, and of course that's the huge traumatic event.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a lot of little things that are happening to us that we're kind of taught by society to, no big deal. Pull your pull yourself up by your bootstraps and let's get going. And maybe it helps to sort of slow down and just notice all the little infractions we took on as well.
Yeah, 100%. And, things like, chronic emotional neglect would be considered a little T trauma. Um, and those are things that are sometimes so subtle that we're not able to recognize or pick up on them. But over time, that accumulates. And neglect is a really hard thing too, because it's hard to point to something that isn't there. It's easier to point to a thing that's there than it is to the thing that didn't happen, right? This thing did happen, but here's a whole bunch of things that didn't happen. And so that's another aspect of trauma. It's not always what did happen, it's sometimes what didn't happen that should have happened. And and so that can fall into the category of little t traumas, feeling invisible as a child, being told to suppress your emotions. That's a really big one. That the whole like uh well, in my family, the common phrase was like, "Shit or get off the pot," or, "Don't be dramatic," or, emotions just weren't really tolerated. That negative emotions were often seen as, an inconvenience, and that teaches you that your emotions aren't safe, and so then your emotions tend to get, uh well, they don't get to be fully processed or felt or attuned to or, processed. Yeah, it's a that's a big thing, and I think that's pretty pretty common in our culture, and especially in, cultures of high demand religion where it's more widely accepted to be feeling positive emotions than negative emotions.
Do you think suppressing any part of you, hiding any part of you that is a normal part of who you are, do you think that sort of goes into the same space where maybe I'm not wording this right.
No, I
You
get what
said
you're saying.
earlier that suppressing emotions is one of the areas that we can incur little traumas. Just
Yeah.
being expected to be quiet when we're trying to express ourselves or to move on when we haven't felt like anyone heard us and met us where we are. Do you think that traumas, little t, big T, do you think traumas come anytime that we're suppressing ourselves in order to be what others expect us to be?
Yes. And, so and Gabor Mate talks about this a lot, but he talks about the need for authenticity, to be an authentic version of ourselves. And when we suppress our own needs or we disconnect from who we truly are because it's not tolerated by other people, we lose connection with self. And part of, what I teach my clients, about the ventral vagal state of safety and social engagement and connection is that's not just about connection to others. It's also about connection to self, and having a safe connection, authentic connection with ourself is a really important part of being a healthy human. So yeah, I do think that that is incredibly impactful. And um, having having a childhood or having a culture that continually reflects back that you're not okay, you're not accepted, that your emotions are not not okay. And this shows up. I mean, this is just our culture. When you think about when we walk, we meet somebody, at the grocery store. Oh, hi, how are you doing? I'm fine, thanks. We don't actually have space to truly listen to how people are. Um, Yeah, I think it's a problem. I think that we live in a society that is not very accepting of negative emotions. I think that we don't know how to work with them. We don't know how to be with that, and that's because we didn't get that information growing up. And that goes back to the culture that we live in.
I grew up in a home, definitely love, and there was a moderate to highly moderate amount of respecting each other's space. I never felt that I needed to not be me with my parents, but my parents were very emotionally unavailable. Anytime I would go to my parents with a hard conversation, they would find some way to basically call on me to go deal with that on my own.
Yeah.
And when it got into adulthood, anytime I confronted a parent with something where I got hurt and I just wanted to be heard about some infraction that had happened, there was resistance to that, and to the point where I was, telling you the other day that I would often be in a conversation where my father or mother would just hang up with me.
Yeah.
We'd be on the phone and I'm trying to express that I'm feeling something and that something happened and I didn't think the thing was a reasonable thing that happened. And I wanted my pain to be heard, and they would disconnect from that as soon as they could. And
Yeah.
hence I carried into my relationship with my kids often that same thing. And so, these things carry on with us. And I want to speak to that in a different way, which is that trauma isn't just the reactions in us that are in our head about what happened to us before and maybe what feels like it's happening again, and hence we're reacting. Trauma is processed by our mind and body in lots of different ways, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We're meaning-making machines, and when something happens, we try to make meaning of it. We create a narrative about it, about ourselves, about our who we are in our families, who we are in the world, and yeah, and so the things that happen to us can create, a lot of negative self-perceptions. We can feel like, this is an example, if our emotions were never allowed to have space, if we were told to go, put them away because they were inconvenient, we can interpret that we're too much, that our needs aren't okay, that it's not okay to have needs, and that is really familiar. That's something that I think that I internalized a lot as a kid, that having needs was bad. Having needs was just not okay. It was an inconvenience. It put me at risk for being disconnected from. And yeah, that's another way that, like you said, your experience of, bringing, something to your parents' attention where you felt like there was a rupture, and then in response to that, you got disconnection. And what you were looking for, what you were seeking was connection. And had they been able to offer a repair process, which would have simply been like, wow, I can hold your experience. You felt this way in response to something I did, and offer, like, I see that, I validate that. I'm so sorry. How can I do better? Or, hey, this is what was really going on for me. I apologize, how that came through, and what you're feeling is okay. Or just at least open up and have that conversation. That would have facilitated connection, which is what we're all seeking. And instead, what happened was disconnection. And so when we have these types of interactions with people, and even in childhood, when parents cannot offer that repair process, we we internalize disconnection. We go into protection again, because I'm sure how you feel after you've had that interaction with people close to you is that you don't want to go, you don't want to reach out to them again, right? It doesn't make you feel like you want to connect. It makes you feel kind of isolated.
Yeah, we can only do this if we're both happy and all is good.
Yeah.
Otherwise not. Maybe say more about how trauma shows up in us. What we get events, situations that show up and hurt us in some way that we don't feel safe in the world. The world harms us, and we process that the best we do. We come up with mechanisms. Maybe talk for a minute about various ways in which trauma shows up in our mind or our body, or uh, in other ways that maybe people don't think of.
Well, I can share some personal experiences, for me. So I had a lot of challenges in childhood where I didn't fundamentally feel safe. Again, I was loved. My parents, were very loving people. I think my mom, uh, did a great job of being attuned in certain moments, but struggled in others. So there wasn't a consistent attunement there. And I had different things that happened, in school age years, and things like that, that were really overwhelming and traumatizing. And by that point, my parents had both started working, and so I didn't have access to them as resources. And I internalized a lot of that. I held it, on my own, and I learned that, uh, I was it. Like, I was the only one I could rely on. So I was very hyper independent and didn't ask for help and didn't feel safe connecting with others. So I isolated a lot. I developed a social phobia. So had a lot of social anxiety. Had a really hard time connecting with friends. I was painfully shy as a child, painfully shy through high school, and just really struggled to know how to make good, healthy social connections. And then, I developed this social phobia, which made it really, really hard to be at parties or go out with friends or date. I didn't start dating until I was, much, much older for a lot of people. And so it really impacted my life in a lot of different ways, and nobody knew. That's the thing. I was so good at playing it off because we don't wanna advertise to the world that we're feeling vulnerable or insecure. So I presented myself in a completely different way. So when I started to acknowledge, "Oh, I've got a social phobia or I've got social anxiety," people didn't believe me. They said, "Oh, well, I don't believe that." But that's another layer of protection, is the mask that we wear, right? We wear these masks to hide our vulnerabilities, to hide the things that we don't feel safe with. And yeah, I mean, people pleasing is another way that we cope. It's another protection, because if we're keeping that other person happy, then we're in good favor with them. They're not gonna disconnect from us. And and in the end, we disconnect from ourselves, right? Because we are people pleasing at the expense of our authentic selves. So we sort of self abandon in those moments.
Some people might dismiss that they're carrying trauma because they seem to be getting along okay when it comes to their reactions. But trauma can show up in a whole host of ways. What more would you want to say about that?
Oh, so much. This is my jam, and this is a big part of my experience. So, when we've gone through trauma, especially when it's been chronic trauma or developmental trauma, and we don't foundationally have an easy way to return to balance or safety or that ventral vagal state. And so we live in perpetual states of high activation. Then our brain becomes hypersensitized, and our nervous system is in high gear all the time, and we don't come back to the homeostatic state of repair. And that can take a toll on the body in physical ways. And so, some of the ways that trauma can show up for people is through chronic illnesses. Some of them can be very serious in nature. They did I don't know. Some people may be familiar with the ACEs study that was done. I think back in the late '90s, and they took it was through Kaiser Permanente, and it was quite a large study, somewhere around 17 to 20,000 people, and they correlated their hospital visits or their doctor's records with their history of trauma, and they found that people who had ACEs are basically it stands for adverse childhood experiences, and they found that the more ACEs a person had, the more likely they were to have different serious, health conditions. So, uh, childhood adverse experiences are linked to twice the risk of heart disease, two times the risk of stroke, three times the risk of chronic respiratory disease, and three times the risk of depression. And if you had 4 or more ACEs, so if you had 4 or more adverse childhood events as listed in this study, you were 12 times more likely to attempt suicide and 5 times more likely to suffer from depression. So there was a huge correlation. And what's also interesting is, so it shows up in those very serious health conditions, but it can also show up in what's called mind body health conditions. And these are things, like chronic fatigue syndrome, IBS, fibromyalgia, chronic migraine, or any kind of disorder. If you've ever gotten a diagnosis and they've called it functional So if there's a functional before it, that means, or idiopathic, that means that they've done all the tests and they cannot find a reason for it. You've got a real thing, it's really happening to you, but they just don't know why. And these fall under the category of mind, body, and somatic health issues. And so this is an interesting statistic, but it says there's an estimated 40 to 60% of primary care visits are for conditions that are stress related or functional with no clear organic cause. Um, and that's huge to think of how many people are going to the doctor and finding out that a lot of what they're dealing with is stress related, or can be linked back to even traumatic experiences.
Yeah. So for folks out there, maybe you notice sort of the traditional way we think of this, which is, yeah, every time an event happens that has any similarity to the thing that happened to me in the past, I show up reacting a certain way. And I don't like the way that that reaction plays out. It doesn't serve me well anymore. But as you're pointing out, it can show up in a whole host of ways. Folks could be dealing with anxieties, folks could be dealing with pain, uh, certain levels of disassociation. It can be a whole host of things. And inevitably, whatever did happen to us is affecting us. Um, the goal in not necessarily just this conversation, but the conversations that will follow is to help you to be aware of it so that we can start to do something about it. And I want to ask, is it, what do what is healing trauma? What is rewiring ourselves around these events, these things that happen to us, the way that we've processed them, the mechanisms we've come up with to deal with those, to keep ourselves safe? What does it look like to get better? What does it look like to get help from those things?
Well, there are a multitude of different things people can do to initiate, um, you know, growth and health and healing. Um, yeah, this is a really rich topic, actually. So the most important thing to know is that our nervous system is plastic. We can rewire a lot of our responses. It is possible to heal, and I work as a trauma recovery coach, and I specialize in helping people who are dealing with mind body conditions. So these are, again, like the chronic fatigue kind of stuff, chronic pain issues, and things that have showed up somatically in the body. Because sometimes the brain becomes so hypersensitized that it starts to turn on physical symptoms in its attempt to sort of try and protect us. It thinks that there's something dangerous happening, and it turns on a symptom, in its attempt to sort of help us, which, can be very bothersome. So people will come to me when they've, experienced really bothersome or symptoms that basically, interrupt their ability to live a normal functional life. And the same thing can happen with anxiety or depression, or different emotional and mental health kind of things. And these often correlate with mind body conditions. A lot of people that I work with also have, um, anxiety and, panic attacks sometimes, and depression. So essentially the process of healing is is developing awareness, is having the psychoeducation to understand what's happening to you. When you can demystify what's happening, it helps you to be able to respond to it better. It helps you to feel like more normal, because this is so common with so many people. This is not uh this is not an uncommon thing. There were some other statistics about how common trauma is, and it says 70% of adults worldwide have experienced at least one traumatic event in their lives. And again, like I said before, I really don't think the majority of humans living in this time have ever really been given especially healthy developmental time, where they wired their nervous system to be robust and healthy and resilient. And so part of the healing process is, again, that psychoeducation, that understanding what's happening, understanding your nervous system, learning how to bring regulation and safety, and offering sort of the thing that we didn't get as children. So if we didn't have um, enough positive attunement and that helped develop our nervous system in a positive way, then we kind of can do this thing called reparenting. We offer those moments of attunement to ourself, and we sort of help to repattern and rebuild our nervous system to understand how it can return to safety, that the world is essentially objectively safe. That's what's really interesting about the human brain, is we have this ability to sort of repeat the past and to predict the future. And this is a it's a bit of a glitch that we have. Animals, when they go through trauma, or they go through difficult things, they shake it off and they move on. They don't start thinking about, oh my gosh, when's it going to happen again? But we have a brain that does that. And a lot of times we can convince ourselves that there's something really scary or dangerous that's happening when objectively there's not. Like, we are, like, we're sitting in a home and we're safe and everything's okay. And so part of healing is being able to bring ourselves back to be able to show ourselves that we're actually safe in the here and now, and building those cues of safety and making new meaning of what happened, and being able to respond to ourselves with kindness and self-compassion, taking the pressure off, and softening our all the protections that we have developed over the years to sort of cope and deal with the different feelings and experiences we've had. And also another thing is, for those of you who got the message that emotions were wrong or bad or shouldn't be felt or shouldn't be expressed, being able to learn that they are okay, like normalizing those, making space for normal human emotions, and learning how to work with your emotions in a healthy way. A lot of times we suppress our emotions because we think they're not okay, and then they blow up. So there are different ways that we can learn healthy responses to emotions and healthy ways to work with them.
Yeah, I mean, if nobody ever took our concerns seriously when we got hurt, we might show up overreacting, feeling overwhelmed, and showing up in ways that are just loud and intrusive to someone else's experience. And getting the help that is available to us through various tools. And again, we'll get into these as we work through going forward. But as we start talking about tools, some of these tools just slow us down and go, hey, you're safe in the world. You really are. Like, the thing that happened to you when you were 10, that's not the thing that's happening right here.
Yeah.
You're a grown adult. Parts work is big on this. You're a grown adult. You don't need to think or feel about this situation the way you thought and felt about the thing that happened to you when you were 11 years old. And and not that, again, not that your reaction or how you handle is bad, it's how you protected yourself. But now we fast forward, now we're here, it doesn't serve us anymore. And the chance to be present and just slow down and go, okay, I felt that. I felt my body do that thing it did from the time I was 11 till now, but it doesn't need to mean what it meant then.
Yeah.
And I can start to be present with the part of me that feels that without me needing to react to it.
Yeah.
Um, and I noticed that in the last, I'll say 5 years, moments where I would have just protected myself and overreacted, I can sit really still in a conversation and try to work through to, the past the rupture part and get to the repair and figure all that out in a disagreement. Um, in the opening of the show, we talked about trauma showing up as perfectionism,
Hmm.
people pleasing, procrastination, ambition. Often these personality traits that we have, and some of them look really good from our perspective about ourselves or from the
Hmm.
outside looking in. You know, if you are in a detail oriented job, your employer loves it that you're a perfectionist. If if you stay and work 6 days a week and 10 hours a day, the sometimes you're often your employer is going to love your ambition. You and I are in the middle of watching a TV show, Succession, and it's heavy. It's trauma. It's
Yeah.
the most dysfunctional, traumatized family I've ever gotten the chance to sort of watch, and it's a TV show, and at least one of the kids has a significant amount of ambition. He wants to be in charge. He wants to lead the company. He wants to, but it all boils back to I want to get dad's approval in a real way for once in my damn life.
Yeah.
And I just want to note that some of our positive traits, as perceived by ourselves or the world, can maybe not be positive all the time for us. They might be holding us back. They might be hurting us. And they might go back to some moment in time where we didn't get the validation we needed. We didn't get the acceptance we needed. We didn't get the approval of how we were living our humanity out. And we will come up with ways to sort of constantly try to get that thing. And even if we get it on this one occasion, the world might say, "Oh, today you were so great." The very next time you'll be trying to get it again because you never feel good enough because you're looking for something that's outside of you,
Yeah.
when really this work is about getting inside of you in noticing what it was that happened to you, what that led to, what it meant, how that got processed, and realizing that you're not that kid in that moment anymore, and you now have the skills to handle your life differently so that you can create boundaries. So a person who's people pleasing will often show up as someone who's always willing to jump in and to help and to stay longer and to give the
Mhm.
ride or do the thing. But maybe that doesn't serve you. Maybe you would be best served in helping at certain moments when it's the right thing to do, but at other moments, drawing boundaries and doing self care and taking care of your world and the things that are most important to your life going well, rather than constantly self sacrificing in order to
Yeah.
make other people in the world happy. And do you have anything to say about maybe how trauma shows up in ways that we think fondly of at times, but really isn't always functional?
Yes. So Gabor Mate wrote a book called When the Body Says No, and he talks about different personalities and that are linked to different chronic illnesses or things like or really serious illnesses like cancer, for example. He says there's a cancer personality type, and that's the person who our culture rewards so much, the self-sacrificing, like if you were to read somebody's obituary, it would say like, "Oh, she was so wonderful. She was always there when her neighbors needed her. She never said no. She was so selfless. She was so," right? And we look at that person and we think, "Oh gosh, they're the most amazing human." However, there's so much disconnection from self there, and there's so much self-sacrificing that it costs you. It costs you. And that's not a healthy balance, and not being able to have boundaries or say no or be like give an authentic yes, it costs you. It's 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 not ultimately it's not ultimately the best way to live. I mean, I guess if you really like being the self-sacrificer, but over time, I think it breaks you down, and I know this from my experience because I have, and I still struggle with this. I can be over accommodating. I am definitely can be a people pleaser, and I have a lot of deep perfectionism tendencies. I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist because I still struggle with that, and it causes an internal strain on my body when I wanna set a boundary and I'm not setting that boundary, there's a tension I'm holding. When I have over accommodated in some way, I can feel deep resentment, and those are unhealthy things to hold on to. So part of my healing and growth process is learning to get comfortable with what comes up inside of me when I do set a boundary or when I choose myself. Um, it's interesting because just another personal share here. Um, I I have a hard time in our relationship when I'm not taking care of Teddy. Bill has a dog, and I've come into his life, and Teddy's this wonderful, beautiful dog. But I'm kind of at the point where I don't want animals. I didn't choose to have animals, but here's this beautiful dog, Teddy. And and so in order to maintain my own internal boundaries, I have to let Bill do most of the work, and which you are perfectly happily willing to do. You are a great caretaker of Teddy. And but there's still this part of me that feels like, "Oh, I've gotta jump in. I've gotta do it. I've gotta,"
To the point where
and
you tell yourself stories about
mm,
what I'm feeling or thinking about the
yeah,
situation.
yeah. Like, "Oh, I'm not doing enough," or maybe Bill's perceiving me as not a very kind person, or, yeah, a lot of stuff. I'll come up with all kinds of stuff. So it's really been a challenge for me to sit back and let you drive that, let you take responsibility there, because that's another thing. I can tend to take too much responsibility in situations that aren't necessarily mine.
Yeah, I mean, he's a mini poodle. He he really is made to be a lap dog, right?
Mm.
He would serve someone well. We joke around all the time that an old lady who just wants to have a dog he sits on her lap and she just gives him love every day. He'd be perfect for that. Uh, I have a mini poodle, and you and I both work from home. He's not his needs are taken care of. He gets fed, he gets water, he's taken outside. Those things happen, but he doesn't get the amount of attention maybe that he would like to have, and he would like to have it all day long. And so you are trying to, because of your attunement, you're trying to make sure that everyone around you is taken care of
Yeah.
to the detriment of your own well-being.
Mhm.
And so then you either extend yourself too far, which has you being exhausted, or you're feeling judged because you pull back and you think that you're not doing enough. And you and I had a conversation the other day, and what comes out of that in these kinds of situations for any of us, because we all have moments where we are in our own heads beating ourselves up about something or trying to fix it for someone else, is that we have to learn to just sit still and be okay with things the way they are. And rather than have all these stories inside about what is going on, to have an out loud conversation. And you can only do that if you feel safe. If you're in a relationship with a parent or a sibling or a partner who constantly bites your head off or constantly shuts down or constantly whatever the unhealthy reaction is, you're just not going to trust that you can ever work through that. And so I grant that for some people out there, the situation is such that the people you're in relationship with don't have that capacity. You mentioned something earlier, self-parenting.
Mm.
Uh, there's a person in my world, Thomas McConkey. I don't know that you know him, but some listeners will know him. He's a Latter-day Saint who left the church for a time, went into Buddhism, and came back. And he made reference that his family's very orthodox. They are the McConkeys that Bruce R. McConkie and Joseph
Mm.
Fielding Smith and those guys come from. And he said, when I came back from Buddhism in China, where I sort of took that on, I came back and reintegrated with my family, reintegrated with Mormonism. And he said, my parents were very rigid. That's the family I come from. He said, I had to be the adult. I had to be the parent. I had to be the person who just held space for the way things are. And I would only note here that we need to do that with ourselves. We need to just hold space for the way things are. That can be a big help, but it's something we have to learn to do, and it's not something we're going to learn in 20 minutes or a single exercise or a therapy session. It really is something that takes constant practice, and over the long run of weeks, months, and years, little incremental improvements, changes, and
Yeah.
shifts. with
Yeah.
grace that you're gonna get it wrong still, and
Yep.
it's gonna blow up in your face, and you're gonna
Mhm.
think you got this thing down, and the next thing you know, something triggered you and you've overreacted again.
Yes. And, yes. And I think that's kind of a sort of a good place to end on because, um, like the idea of like what does healing look like or what does post-traumatic growth look like? And it's not perfect. There is no place that you arrive to. It's a journey, it's a process. And if you can view it that way of, "Oh, what's the next new glimmer or thing around the corner that I'm gonna be able to see that there's a little bit of a difference in?" I can handle the situation with a little bit more presence. Um, I can choose well, this is a big one for me, for example. I made a very intentional choice about my friendships, after I got sick and I went through a lot of struggle and I went on a healing journey, and I got to a place where I had valued myself enough that I realized, like, what qualities do I want in my friends? What qualities do I want in a relationship? And I thought really, really intently about that. And then I went out in the world and tested it out and found a lot of really good, healthy friendships where these people can meet me at a level that I really want to be met at. And it's been a really beautiful thing for me. And it's continued to help my sense of feeling safe in the world, because when you are met with safe others and you have that community and connection, that just enriches your life. And so, uh, growth doesn't have to be some big giant thing, although for some people it can be really, um, really, I don't know, profound. But it happens in small stages, a little bit at a time. And if you can change your mindset from thinking that you've got to arrive somewhere or there's a destination, and just allow yourself to sort of enjoy the journey and take the pressure off yourself and come home to yourself, because that's really what this healing journey is. It's about coming home to yourself. It's about developing more self connection and authenticity and safety. And yeah, what do you have to add there?
Yeah, there are all kinds of ways that the world bumps into us, and our protective mechanisms get in the way of us having real connection with other human beings.
Yeah.
And I think all of us, to one degree or another, I know there's a few of us that would prefer to just stay completely away from other humans. But for most of us, we want good, healthy human connection with other people. And if we react in ways that are trauma responses, we're going to limit and diminish that ability to connect.
Yeah.
And working on these things, thinking about these things, making room that even if you don't think you've been that hurt by things, to at least sit and let's just get curious about it and be open about it. That maybe there's ways that you respond to the world that are preventing your best self from being in the room. And so as we go forward, we'll have lots of conversations around that. This coming week, the next episode that we do, we're going to delve into religious and spiritual trauma, which is a big one for this community in particular. And I hope, folks, that you've gotten a lot from today's episode, but also just be aware that we're going to now start to move into talking about a specific kind of trauma. And then we'll follow up, taking this in various directions that will hopefully be deeply helpful to each of us growing and becoming better versions of ourselves. I always want to say our best self, but we'll never be our best. It's always a
No.
work in project, a work in progress, and um, we ought to give ourselves tons of grace because we really are all doing the very best that we can.
Mm.
And so, if we can just be patient with ourselves, give grace to ourselves, give it to others too, and just work on making little incremental changes. And those changes aren't necessarily a behavioral change. They often start as just an insight or a thought change, and then they show up in our real life as something that shifted in our behavior.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say? Otherwise, I think I've said enough for today's episode, and I really appreciate what you bring to these conversations.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here and grateful to be talking about this subject. It's something that's been really pivotal in my life. And I just give people information about it. Just again, help to demystify it, to normalize it, to let people know that this is really a normal part of being human and that there are things that we can do to support ourselves in feeling better physically and feeling better emotionally and mentally and having better relationships and a better connection to ourselves.
So, folks, please do tune in for the next episode of the Almost Awakened podcast, where we go into religious and spiritual trauma. And if you wouldn't mind, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. And we're really excited that you're here for the journey with us. And we hope that things that we say resonate and are helpful to your own growth and your own awakening. And otherwise, we'll see everybody next week, and appreciate you tuning in. Have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Almost Awakened podcast. For more tools, resources, and real talk about conscious living, visit almostawakened.org. That's almostawakened.org, your resource for waking up